There was a time before Attack on Titan became what it is now, before Marley, before the rumbling, just pure survival, when humanity's biggest enemy were the Titans, back when the walls felt like the entire world. And outside of those walls was uncertainty. That was the early Attack on Titan's appeal to me, the raw emotional tension, that feeling of humanity being cornered. Every expedition outside the walls felt less like a political outing and more like a massacre waiting to happen. The walls felt like safety, Paradise felt like nihilistic times, and the Titans were genuinely terrifying. Their presence was really felt, and I've always felt like there's something unsettling about an enemy that doesn't seem to hate you, like morality is irrelevant to them, and early Attack on Titan leaned into this constantly. One Titan used to feel like an uphill battle. That's something I think a lot of people forget because of how large the scale the world building eventually got. But early in the series, one abnormal Titan showing up was terrifying. One mistake meant death. One wrong decision meant watching someone in the Survey Corps die. And the series never shied away from that either. The people just felt like a part of the world a lot more. Take the Survey Corps for instance. Back then, the Survey Corps weren't invincible. Half of the time, it looked like they were completely overwhelmed, mortal in a way. And that really made it feel real. The Titans were simple, and they were the bad guys. There was no mistaking that. Fear really elevated the Titans for me, and that's what made it work so well. And that's way more disturbing than an enemy screaming about hatred or revenge or some morally complex ideology. Because even now, there's something deeply unsettling about them. The way they move, their facial expressions, their creepy smiles. Early Attack on Titan understood psychological fear better than almost any anime I've watched, and it wasn't just about the Titans, but the people as well. It just made for a very great atmosphere. The feeling that at any moment something could happen, and the mysteries played a very huge part in that too, because back then nobody understood anything. Where did the Titans come from? Why do they eat people? What is at the basement? Why could Eren transform? Every answer left us a little bit more perplexed. And because the audience only knew as much as the characters did, the whole world felt immersive. Sometimes I think about what could have been, not because I dislike what Isayama eventually created. I actually really like the story for what it is. I genuinely think it's a classic. The political themes, the moral ambiguity, humanity becoming its own worst enemy, it all elevates the series beyond just humans versus monsters for me. But there's still a part of me interested by the version of the story that never existed. A version where the walls remain the center of everything. No Marley, no outside nations, just humanity desperately trying to survive in a world that was made against them. Because if you think about it, there's a lot you could do with that premise. Imagine the Survey Corps not just fighting Titans, but slowly reclaiming territories, forgotten districts, old human strongholds swallowed by nature and the remnants of humanity's past. Humanity expanding outward beyond the walls, with all the constant problems that would naturally come with that. The cost of lives, the lack of resources, making every inch of reclaimed land feel almost like it's not worth it. And in a world like that, resources become one of the central driving forces of the story. Food shortages, water shortages, medical shortages, people starving while nobles sit comfortably behind the inner walls, pretending everything's stable, political corruption, greed, people hoarding supplies while soldiers die outside of the walls. And honestly, the political dynamics inside the walls could have become really interesting. Now imagine the different factions forming naturally over time outside of the ones that already exist. Some people wanting expansion, others believing humanity should stay behind the walls forever. Some seeing the Survey Corps as heroes, others seeing them as reckless villains. And you could feel the tension spreading throughout Paradise, not just the battlefield, but society as well. Imagine entire districts beginning to resent each other over food distribution or resources being located near Titan territory, meaning soldiers would constantly have to risk their lives just to keep civilization functioning. And eventually you start to ask questions like, how much survival is humanity actually willing to pay for? At what point does fear completely destroy society inside the walls?
That version of Attack on Titan could have become this gritty survival story where humanity is constantly on the verge of collapse. I would have loved to see more of that because the world inside the walls was already fascinating. The idea of generations of people being born without ever seeing the outside of the world, that alone was interesting. An entire world shaped by fear, death, and loss, kids growing up to believe the walls were their safety, and the few individuals willing to step outside of those walls becoming a symbol of their hope. And that's why the Scouts worked so well as an emotional center of the story. What made them compelling was the fact that half of the time they looked completely broken. And I think if the story stayed focused on the walls, the Survey Corps would have naturally remained the center of the story. Not just as soldiers, but humanity's obsession with hope. Because what are they really fighting for? Freedom? Survival? Purpose? Maybe all of the above. And honestly, I think that's why early Attack on Titan resonated with so many people. Because beneath all of the horror and violence, there was this constant feeling of humanity refusing to lay down, even when the world basically demanded it. A story about people standing up against something impossible, even knowing they might die. And there are obvious problems with this approach to the story. Problems I actually think Isayama did really good at avoiding. The biggest one being what I like to call the zombie problem. You ever notice how a survival series starts off incredible, then slowly becomes repetitive? Something like The Walking Dead, for instance. At first the threat feels terrifying, but eventually the audience adapts, the monsters stop feeling dangerous, and once that happens, the tension starts to disappear. Because fear heavily relies on uncertainty. And eventually every survival story reaches a crossroads. Either the world evolves or the fear disappears completely. That's probably why Attack on Titan changed the way it did. The series understood that Titans alone probably couldn't carry the mystery forever. Eventually we needed answers. Eventually the world had to become bigger. And while part of me misses the smaller survival horror version of the story, I also respect the fact that the series refused to stay the same. Attack on Titan stopped being a story about monsters outside of the walls and became a story about monsters people create in themselves.